We should introduce ourselves.
I'll jump into that. My name is Nick Muscali, and I work for Chorus. I've been part of the New Zealand Utilities Advisory Group, or the NZUAG, for over 10 years now. The NZUAG board is made up of 5 utilities, one from water, gas, electricity and telecommunications, along with a 5th utility spot, which I currently hold. There are also 5 corridor managers, including one from rail and an independent chair. One of the primary purposes of the NZUAG is to manage the National Code of Practice for utility operators' access to transport corridors, or a little bit more simply, the code. The board, which has 5 utilities and 5 corridor managers, is a reflection of the code to achieve a fair balance between the access rights of utilities and corridor managers' ability to manage the road corridor. And that's really the reason why we are here today. We're undertaking the 3rd review of this code, and we're really seeking feedback to ensure that the proposed changes do achieve that balance. Before I kick on, shall I throw it across to you, Ian, to give an intro?
It's probably not a bad idea. My name is Ian Cox. I'm a principal advisor for Waka Kotahi, the New Zealand Transport Agency. I work for the Transport Services Group, the Program and Standards Division of that group. And the focus of that group of what I do is looking at standards and guidelines. So this is pretty much down the road of what I do. I'm the government roading sector representative on the NZUAG board. So I represent one of the corridor managers. And so Nick and I are here today really to show a sort of a united front, if you like, a balance between the parties. And let's kick on, Nick.
Perfect. Look, you might have noticed this webinar will be recorded. I'd appreciate if everyone could stay on mute throughout the presentation. You can put questions into the chat, and when we get to the discussion slide, we will sort of work through and try and answer those questions. After the remainder of the presentation, if there is time, we'll look to open up to the floor. If there isn't, and we've still got questions to answer, then we'll respond to those questions via our website. The presentation and all the code review documents, including a recording of this webinar, will be available on our website under the Code Review tab. The next slide. Is that you, Ian?
No, it's still you.
Yeah, that's too. Sorry, not even reading my notes. Apologies. Look, the objectives of this session, we really want to provide a bit of background on the code review and obviously an update of where we are in the process. We'll work through the proposed amendments to the code that we collected through the first round submissions, and we'll also go into a little bit of detail about some of the points that we weren't able to adopt from the first round submissions. We'll look at discussing some of the potential impacts from the proposed amendment, and also, I think, to provide a little bit of background into some of the submissions, and we'll also let you know how to take part in the second round of submissions and by when.
Okay, next slide. Colin? Colin?
Yep. It's there.
It's there. Oh, okay. Right. So what we've adopted, as we've done in the past, is pretty much a standard approach. And we're using a standard approach because it helps us with the approval process at the end. It's an accepted and acceptable way of doing things as far as the government advisors are concerned. We've publicly advertised the code review at each stage so that we have it out there, and we're looking for people to have any opportunity to comment. So we went through the first stage and we've gathered up the proposed changes. We've commented on those. We're presenting the proposed changes to be commented on the second stage, but it doesn't actually stop people from reconsideration of what they put up. They can use the comments that we've put there to help perhaps formulate how they respond. We have kept Treasury in the loop on the progress as we go through it. The importance of that is that they will have actions at the end, need to know that we've gone through a proper process that they can then present to government. We're looking to finish this off by seeking board approval, the whole board, in November, and then we'll make a formal submission to the Minister for approval. Next slide.
Yep.
So I suppose just this is the third review of the code. I think previous reviews were 2014 and actually I think 2018 were the other two. So currently we've completed stage one. Through that stage, we received 87 submissions from 11 different entities. Of those, and Ian will go through in a bit more detail shortly, 34 of these were accepted or accepted in part. 8 were out of scope for the code. 2 didn't recommend change, and 43 we were unable to accept. As it notes, the changes in both tabular and track change versions are available on our website under the Code Review tab, and we are now kicking into stage 2. This closes at the end of the month, September, and as Ian touched on, submissions are limited to what was made in the first round only, and we're unable to accept any submissions outside of this. We've notified via industry groups, and both stages were advertised to the public through public notices. We held a webinar during the first round of submissions, and obviously the webinar today is part of the second round.
Okay, these are a bit of a summation of what we see as perhaps the major changes. Some of them in themselves aren't all that major. There is one real underlying theme though, and that is improving the whole information held by any of the parties as far as location of assets is concerned. So the first one there future-proofing, it got pointed out that what was in the code relatively was a bit blunt. It didn't actually point at the real aspect of what we were looking for in terms of future-proofing. What it's really about is people to think about what is really needed, but not to go overboard. It should be what is needed, but it should take into account that it should leave the maximum allowable space for everybody else to do the same. And that's outcome isn't really identified in the process. The second one was conflicts of interest, and that's about the fact that if you read it, and most people seem to, it's just appears to be a single point. You declare your conflicts of interest, and that's it. But things change. The point here is that it's not a single point in space. People should be declaring their conflicts of interest as soon as something changes. And the classic one will be the government's busy working on the water industry. At the moment, the supply and maintenance of water services is with local government. It's going to become separate entities. The conflict of interest that that local government had as a water service entity and a corridor manager was that it had interests in both camps that will change, and so the conflict of interest statement for local government is going to change. Now, the same thing happens as commercial entities change their holdings. They might change where they're going to and the type of work that they're doing, the type of utilities they're involved with, and that should have meant that if they do change, there should have been an amended conflict of interest. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing the initial ones and nothing else. So it's been pointed out that in fact, if you change your interests, you must change your statement as well. The third one, the New Zealand Guide to Temporary Traffic Management. Traffic management's always been a contentious point, but what it comes down to is it's a health and safety issue that each party must manage. The corridor manager has a right to say what their preference is. The code doesn't enforce any particular method. It states a preference, but in itself, it doesn't impose that preference on anybody. It simply makes it clear that the parties must agree on a traffic management process and involve that. But it does get to state its preference, which is changed from the Code of Practice for Temporary Traffic Management to the New Zealand Guide to Temporary Traffic Management, because that is the one that will be actively managed. The issue with key performance data is that we are ensuring that people will report strikes as part of that in the future. And we're providing a form for them to do that. For the proper reporting of strikes has always been a bit of an issue. We want to make it clear that parties are responsible. All parties are responsible. It's not just the utility operators. It will include the corridor managers as well, and anybody who is involved in a strike or has information. They are required to report it. The whole thing with sharing information is about the introduction of data improvement plans and the obligation to share information in good faith as part of that. So one of the things we're looking at in terms of sharing information is that there is open processes about data management in the future, including the ability to ensure that data management plans are introduced and they are properly managed. And that then goes on into the recording of new assets and location data, because what we're looking at is requirements for data improvement and recording as part of that, and that will sit under the data management plan. Then we're looking at having reasonable steps to ensure that the data meets the code requirements, and that these records are properly maintained. We then are looking to make sure that these records include anything that's found during a work. So whole issue about what do you do about found assets, somebody else's assets in the ground that aren't recorded. There are some updated obligations to go with that as well. As part of that, what we've introduced, because the code allows us to attach other standards to it, we're looking at the LINS utility location standard and the UK standard on service quality as a way of improving the way that we deal with data, the way it's managed, and the way it's recorded, and the way it's maintained. And of course, one of the things that got raised, which is quite important going forward, is to do with these water service entities and the fact that we're doing the code review now, and they don't exist in such a way. The changes to the legislation haven't all gone through, but there is a way to deal with that, because the proposed legislation will include the Utilities Access Act. The Utilities Access Act states what the utility operators are and what their rights are. And it's very easy for the code simply to refer back to the appropriate section of the Utilities Access Act and say, basically, that any entity that's included in that section of the Act then is a party to the code. And you follow through with that, Colin, and these were the biggest issues with why submissions weren't accepted. You'll see that there's a number there that said outside of scope. One of the biggest issues is that the Utilities Access Act is the empowering legislation, and it states what can be in the code. And basically, the issue then is anything that's not actually in the Act, and in fact may fall under other acts, or simply is out of scope. It's an ability to actually only include what's in the Utilities Access Act. Anything then that is beyond the scope of that, and it does allow for technical changes, and it does allow for other standards to be attached, but anything outside of that is beyond our ability to include within a review of the code. And the other side of that is this is a deemed regulation. this code. What that means is that the empowering legislation put this in place, and it made it have the legislative empowerment that sits behind it, which makes it a deemed regulation rather than being regulation as most people would be used to, where it's actually composed and gone through the parliamentary process. It was therefore very important when we were looking at the legislation that it went through a select committee process that included the whole issue with the code. But it does mean that we have to be quite clear on a legal basis what matters are in a code and what are not. And one of the biggest issues is because it's legislation, it must actually be concrete. It must in law be something that people can show evidentiary proof of. And the issue with aspirational changes is that they, at the point in time when the code is approved, may not exist. And if they don't exist, we cannot include them because of the legislative requirements that sit on this document. The other aspect was in terms of maintaining proper balance between the parties. We have to be fair, and we want to make sure that the code is useful to everybody. And so we don't want to swing it either way. And to that extent, the review team itself reflects that, and that we're looking always to have balance between both sides of the industry, and take a point that we agree on all the changes that are put forward. I think in a lot of cases, and this is just an expressed opinion, people think about what they really want, and submit it in a way where it's not intended to be that favourable to a party, and maybe they want to take a view on what they've put forward. Still the ability to reword and respond to the comments that have been made by the review committee, and maybe that can help them still put together something that is fair and useful to the industry.
Thanks, Ian. Slide highlights some of the potential impacts of the proposed code amendments. However, I think providing some background on the submissions may highlight what the submitters were trying to achieve, and there were really two key submitters in this code review. One was Wellington City Council to help support Let's Get Wellington Moving, and the other was a industry working group set up in partnership between the NZUAG and Civil Contractors New Zealand. While I can't comment directly on the basis for the Wellington submission, I can for the Service Strike Initiative submission. The NZUAG and CCNZ have been having ongoing conversations around how to reduce service strikes. For both our members, this was a very key topic. So we thought with the upcoming code review, to get the most value, the belief was a coordinated industry submission would have the best chance of success in making changes to the code that would have a beneficial outcome of reducing service strike harm. And so as such, a program of work was put together, and the objectives were to support NZUAG to lead a whole industry conversation on strike reductions, resulting in a set of recommendations for proposed changes to the code, to engage key stakeholders to get quickly to the core of issues by understanding on-the-ground experience, and to harness their engagement in creating targeted focus areas for consideration in the code review, and also to enable building within the industry, to relationship building within the industry to improve communication channels and support increased collaboration. So this group was made up of all parts of the industry that included NZUAG, Before You Dig, KiwiRail, WorkSafe, utilities, and councils, including Wellington City Council, as well as consultants that are involved in the industry. And, you know, I suppose that was the key benefit of this group. It provided a great cross-section of the industry, which enabled us, you know, that ideas could be discussed and impacts across the industry could be understood quickly. I think, I know myself, I've been involved in a number of initiatives with Chorus, with Before You Dig, aimed at sort of strike reduction, but the problem is we often will do it in a way that we see, we think will help reduce strikes, and not mindful of how those, you know, what we're looking to change, or if we're putting extra, I suppose, onerous obligations on contractors, we're not seeing the cost. So I suppose, yeah, what I'm probably walking around is by having a cross section of the industry, we were able to really understand the impacts quickly and in real time. So I think the key point to take when reviewing both the Wellington City Council submission and the service strike submission is they were aimed at reducing strikes and improving utility data, and that's really what the code was drafted to achieve. The other key point which comes out of the service strike initiative, and you can actually read the report from this. It's on our website under the committees and working group tab, and it is worth a read. But the other key point that adopting the change is only really the first step. So as Ian highlighted, we've still got a process to go. We've got the second round, and ultimately the changes will be accepted at some point. But the next challenge will be education, and where the carrot doesn't work, this will likely be followed by enforcement, a stick. But currently, there's an obligation on utilities report strikes on their network. This is poorly adhered to, as Ian mentioned, and you can actually find previous year's reports on our website under the compliance reports. And although this is a mandatory obligation, the rate of returns makes very poor reading. One of the key changes look to improve this reporting by placing an obligation on the doer to report in a format that provides data in line with international standards, and ideally this data will enable learning that will ultimately reduce service strikes. Back to you, Ian.
I think the next one is our discussion. So does anybody have any questions? I don't see anything in the chat. Colin?
No, there's nothing apart from sort of a couple of comments around the end, beginning when everybody was nice and quiet. There's been no chat and there's been no questions yet. So type away.
Well, if nobody's got any questions, maybe we'll hold it over to the end and we'll finish the presentation. And then if people want to ask questions, we might even go to opening it up and people can ask them direct.
There's one question there, Ian. Has there been any comments made from my work sites?
I'm not aware of any comments that have come through from my work sites. In fact, the whole issue with my work sites has been that it's been pretty quiet for quite some time.
I think maybe just on a little bit more background on that is, while the code obviously provides a guide to accessing the corridor and what and mandatory obligations on both sides, it doesn't actually dictate what system can be used. So I mean the two key systems are obviously My Work Sites and Submitica, and both of them follow the process sort of set out in the code around timeframes and types of work and so on. So I imagine if there's anything adopted that forces a change to My Work Sites, then I imagine they would make it. But other than that, I don't think there's been any discussion directly with My Work Sites. Go to the next slide, Colin.
I think so. Okay, so reading through the why is this critical? The whole idea with the code is that it's about how the industry behaves to each other. And it's really important to actually have a document that actually spells out how we're going to provide for each other's interests. Plus, of course, it's sitting there in the middle of the legislation, and the legislation has some basic requirements, but doesn't tell you to any great degree why. So the code itself is about the flesh on the bones, if you like, the bones being the legislation and the flesh being the rest of what people have to know to make things work. So it's important that we have the code, and it's important that the code is right, that it actually is a balance point for the industry. It shares obligations and duties across all the parties, and then the whole issue becomes one of compliance. And we certainly need to look at the improvement to that. And as Nick said, if the industry won't do it off its own back, then maybe we'll end up having to talk to government about what enforcement is needed and what oversight. We're trying to keep it in the industry. We'd rather have freedom to do what the industry wants, but at the end of the day, if we don't actually have people behaving in good faith to each other, then we aren't going to achieve that. So it's very much important to everybody in the industry that the code is right, and therefore people will feel that there's some duty on them to comply. We still think that there's plenty of time to have your say. There's still stuff out there that is worthy of comment and further thought. We'd like you to participate, have your opportunity at least to follow through on that. And we look forward to those comments. Thank you, Colin.
So look, I do appreciate the time you've made, attending today's webinar. I think as Ian said, I think we're really keen to hear how the proposals affect you, even if you think that there won't be an effect. To me, that's good feedback. As a reminder, the submission needs to be on the previous submissions from the first round. So, and we're unable to accept completely new requirements. So, I'd recommend going to the code review section on our website and familiarising yourself with those submissions. There's a form on the website that allows you to make the submission. It's under the code review tab, or you can actually email the submissions to info@nzuag.org.nz, or even mail it in by hard copy to the address on our contacts tab on the website. Submissions close at the end of September, and as I reiterated at the start, even if you think change won't affect you, it would be great just getting that sort of feedback.
Okay. I see there's one question. I'm pretty sure that we didn't actually get a request to amend the working with trees section in the code. And I know that the whole issue with cut trim notices relating to the electricity hazards from trees regulations is a fraught issue that is trying to all parties that's involved with it. But I wasn't aware that actually came up. You were aware of anything, Nick?
No, I hadn't seen anything on that. I just wonder, Stephen, is it worth clarifying a little bit? Are you talking cut trim notices to corridor managers or to the tree owners in the road?
Well, if you read the regulations, it's supposed to be the tree owner. But of course, if it's sitting in road reserve, then the cut trim notice is usually sent to the road controlling authority to deal with. And you can see that's been confirmed. Should we throw it open to the floor? Nick, and see if there's anyone who's got a question off the top of their head.
Yeah, definitely agree. Might be easier than typing.
Does anybody have any other questions? Is there anything you'd like clarified or further information about? No?
Not another question, I say, but it's probably expanding on the one that I've already placed up. It sounds like, yeah, I might tempted to place a submission in for clarification, just to make it specifically clear regarding trim notices and the process, I suppose, because yeah, there is a bit of grief, as you said again. In some respects, a bit of frustration.
But it would be a new issue, and as a new issue, we may not consider it.
True. Like I say, it refers to the external act rather than within the code itself, but I don't know.
Yes, I don't think the code mentions anything to do with the process of apart from the fact that the regulations are there, I think.
Yeah, it refers it refers out to the electricity hazards from trees regulations. So it doesn't, but it just says you should comply with it, or not comply with it, but adhere.
Right.
You could argue the fact that the interpretation of that has differed between some parties, and that's the contentious part.
Right. But it's largely outside the issue, I would think, of the UAA to require the code to argue that issue, I think. But it's something maybe we can look at in the future. The interesting thing will be to find out that there's a proposal for a new set of regulations, and it'll be interesting to see what it says.
Hi, Jeremiah here from the Christchurch City Council. I just have a question probably to Nick around the key performance data. I think he discussed it's mostly around strike reporting or strike reduction. Is the key performance data just focus on that?
The key performance data, I've been currently the code asks utilities to report strike, third parties damage on their network, and there's an obligation on corridor managers to report number of I think it's a number of watts. I actually can't remember the exact wording. And that's been the focus, but I think we've looked to collect that data over the last 6-7 years, and I suppose the challenge is the data doesn't really, because of the compliance to the reporting, it doesn't actually provide any value. So what we're looking to do is tweak that a little bit by providing, if we can get more input from the doers of strikes there's likely to be a better data set collected, i.e. the person that actually, does the damage is going to have a whole lot more data than the utility that comes afterwards to repair their network. So the idea is if we can create I suppose, an ability for people to report that data, then likely would get a data set that would enable some learnings to be made, and hopefully, the idea would be to reduce strikes through that data. Probably just also aligns better with how other strike avoidance sort of groups are doing it overseas.
Oh, thank you.
There was one question raised in the question and answers to which I've responded around where do people actually get to see the detail of the revised code and submissions made, and those all of that information is available on our spreadsheet on our website. So if you go to the code review page of the website, there is a link to the track change version of the code, which is what we're suggesting people make comments on, submissions on, and the spreadsheet that contains all of the submissions and the code and the response teams, the responses to those.
Put that link in anyway, just to make it easier. Any other questions or thoughts, comments? I think we'll, rather than drag this out any longer, I think we'll let everyone get back to their day, and I think really would appreciate any comments or thoughts on the round one submissions, and yeah, look forward to receiving them. Anything else from you, Ian?
No, just to thank everybody for being here this morning. Still open if you want to ask questions. You can do so via info@nzuag.org.nz, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. Thanks very much. All the best. Have a good day.